Hello and welcome to the troubleshooting portion of the 10-man Shannox guide. This part of the guide is intended for people who are struggling on specific parts of the fight or need help diagnosing why their raid is failing to defeat the encounter. If you're looking for a more general strategy guide on how to approach the fight, then click the link and go back to part 1 of this guide. So the approach we'll be taking in this part of the guide is to look at all the different things that can possibly kill your raid members and how to prevent each of these things from happening. So we'll start with the easiest part, which is, again, Rage Face. Now, Rage Face really only has 2 ways that he can possibly kill somebody. First off, it's not out of the question that his simple melee attacks will be able to cause significant damage to the raid. This is simply a healing issue. The healers aren't reacting fast enough to heal the target who's being attacked by Rage Face. This is less an issue in 10 man since he does pretty minor damage. However, if you're having trouble with this, you should have your healers look for the Rage debuff that is applied to members who are being attacked by Rage Face. That'll give them a good idea of who he's attacking and who needs to be healed. Secondly, and more likely, Rage Face will kill somebody by face raging on them. Generally, this means that the face rage effect is not being broken fast enough. I mentioned in the guide section that it takes a 30,000 damage hit to break the face rage. Now, as the latest hotfix, 100% of attacks that hit Rage Face during face rage will be crits. So it shouldn't be too difficult to break the effect unless you have a really awkward class balance combination, such as having all affliction warlocks or something silly like that. We found that arcane mages can be very useful for breaking the effect. Survival hunters are quite good at it as well. Retribution paladins should be able to handle it. Really, most classes should have at least some abilities that should be able to crit for 30,000 damage. It may also be helpful to have the healer switch heals briefly onto the face-raged target so that the DPS has more time to break the effect. Moving on, there are several other things that may lead to raid member deaths. Probably the most likely culprit is going to be the immolation traps, which Shannox lays on the ground. These things do a significant amount of upfront burst, and they also leave a damage over time effect on the target. And if the target takes any damage while that damage over time effect is on them, they take 40% additional damage from all attacks. So that means if someone steps into a trap and then gets attacked by Rage Face, or gets face raged, or stands in the spiral flames from Shannox's spear throw, they're most likely going to die unless they get significant healing. So it's important that the healers have a way to check if someone is being hit by the immolation trap debuff in order to heal them quickly so they don't die. Alternately, just avoid them all, and that should solve that problem. The only other thing that's likely to kill raid members is going to be the spear throw. When it hits the ground, it hits the entire raid, or at least everyone within 50 yards, for about 50,000 fire damage. And then it leaves a ring of flames spiraling out from the center of the impact point, which will explode within a couple of seconds of the impact. The spiral flames do significant damage, so it's very important that everyone in the raid stays very clear of these. They're quite easy to avoid. It's really the only, aside from the traps, the only avoidance check in the whole fight. So, aside from those 3 things, there's really only one other way to wipe this fight, and that's due to tank deaths. One thing to note is that both Shannox and Riplim are untauntable, so if the tank dies, if either tank dies, it's likely to be a wipe. For the most part on 10-man mode, Shannox and Riplim don't do all that much damage. Although Shannox can get some decent bursts going with his Arcing Tear attack, or Arcing Slash attack, because that does not share cooldown with his basic attack, so he can do basic attack into Arcing Slash combos. Generally, this shouldn't be a huge issue as long as the healers are on their toes, but it's something to watch out for. More likely, the problem is going to be coming from your Jagged Tear stacks, and those getting too high. Now, we outlined in the strategy guide how to deal with Jagged Tear stacks and how to get them to drop off your tanks, but if you can't get them to drop off and they build up upwards of 9 or 10, you're going to start having some trouble keeping your tanks up, or at least you're going to have to be dropping a lot of mana into them to keep them alive, which may impact your chances to get through Phase 2. Unfortunately, there's not really any succinct way to explain the precise method for kiting Riplim into the Crystal Prison traps, so just your tank's going to have to do their best. Any experienced tank should know how to manipulate a mob's movement in such a way, and note that Riplim's hitbox is a fair amount larger than a player's hitbox, so it really shouldn't be that difficult to drag him into the traps. At that point, it's just a matter of timing. Deadly boss mods should give you a timer for when the spear throw happens, or at least when the cooldown of the spear throw is going to come up, and trapping him anytime from the moment that the spear throw comes up to the moment when he throws the spear should be enough to help drop stacks. And note again that another method to drop stacks is to make sure that Riplim is far away from Shannox. Wait until you see the spear throw happen. You see the little red indicator on the ground, noting the impact point, and then pull Shannox toward or pull Riplim toward Shannox rather. That way, Riplim has to run back, retrieve the spear, then run all the way back to Shannox, which takes a significant amount of time, especially if you slow him. It's also worth noting that the Shannox tank can do a little bit of kiting of his own if he's only got like 2 or 3 seconds left on his debuff before it falls off. He can kite Shannox as Riplim runs back to him to give the debuff those extra couple seconds. However, if there's more than like 5 seconds, it's probably not worth it. It's just going to cause headaches for the healers and risk separation anxiety happening. So just note that since you can usually heal the tank as long as they have less than say 9 jagged tear stacks, that you really only have to drop stacks every 3rd spear throw, so it's not that hard to execute overall. Another fairly common cause of tank death is when the tank accidentally steps into a immolation trap. As noted, the immolation traps increase damage taken by 40% for several seconds. So any damage the boss is going to deal, especially during when he's frenzied due to one or both of his dogs being dead, is going to be pretty significant, and it's going to probably take a cooldown to keep the tank up through those attacks. Along the same lines, it's worth noting that the area around the tank especially, and sometimes the middle of the room as well, can get quite busy in terms of traps. There will be tons and tons of traps on the ground. If you're finding that it's difficult to navigate through all the traps, then it's maybe as simple as just moving him to one side or the other, moving into an open, clear field. Just make sure that you've cleared the trash in either side before you decide to do this, so that you don't, pull trash in the midst of the boss fight. Now, Phase 2 is relatively simple, but it still can cause some wipes. In particular, the Magma Rupture attack, which creates the spiral flames, does a lot more damage once he starts stacking up the fire vulnerability debuff that he puts on in Phase 2. So literally after, say, the first stack, anyone who gets hit by those spiral flames are probably going to die. So it's very important to remind everyone to stay clear of those flames. Again, they're quite easy to avoid. If you find that the stacks are building up too high and you're wiping to damage, just pure damage that's unhealable at that point, then your best bet may be just to cycle raid cooldowns if you have any available to help mitigate the damage. Things like Aura Mastery, Power Word, Barrier, and so on and so forth. That concludes this strategy and troubleshooting guide for Shannox on 10-man. If you have any other problems with the fight or you don't know what's causing you to wipe, feel free to leave something in the comments and I'll try to get back to you when I can. Thanks again for watching, and I hope this was helpful for you. Good luck.